Welcome back to Personalist Manifestos. My name is Michael Morelli, the host of this ongoing conversation about contemplative revolution. When you say the word peace, it can sound simple. But what happens when the idea of peace becomes a weapon? In the conversation you're about to hear, my friends Myron Penner and Tripp Fuller pull back the curtain on one of the most quietly complicated tensions in religious community life: the space between preaching peace and practicing it. We talk about peace church communities that are long celebrated for their pacifist roots. But we also ask a question: when does a commitment to peace cause us to start protecting the wrong things? And as we wrestle with that question, we talk about what it actually takes to build something real: peace that's rooted in justice, not just the absence of noise. This one is going to challenge some assumptions. And so with that, here's my conversation with Myron and Tripp. I have my friend Myron Penner, my other friend Tripp Fuller here. Tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Well, I've been on the podcast before, so yeah, Myron's
Well,
first
you're
time.
returning.
Yeah,
You're returning. Is this your third time?
yeah.
Yeah. Well,
First time in person though for Tripp.
first
so-
time.
Yeah.
First time in person.
This
First time in
is-
person.
It's only like my third episode recorded in Canada.
There you
This
go.
is my third Canadian episode.
Yes.
We'll see how it
I
goes.
love it. Yeah. No. Well, I want you to, because I generally assume that like my listener base is small enough that you just can't assume that everybody's like, oh yeah, I remember this guy. You know, like so. But yeah, Myron, how we start?
Sure.
Give us a little introduction to yourself,
Yeah.
and then we'll jump into what I want to talk about today.
Sure. Professor of philosophy at Trinity. I've been here for just over 2 decades. Areas I work in are philosophy of religion, philosophy of science, and cognitive science of religion. So lots of science and religion kind of conversations. Another thing that I do here, though, this is about a dozen years ago. Through a variety of circumstances, I started an Anabaptist Mennonite center here at Trinity called the Humanitas Anabaptist Mennonite Center, and we've had different initiatives that we've done over the years. Early days, lots of public events, different things, and basically Humanitas exists to try and nurture theological voices in this peace church tradition, both for the academy and also for the public. And then we also want to provide some content that speaks to people that I kind of describe as intellectually marginalized in church spaces. So people who feel that maybe their churches or their theological inheritance hasn't always been a good steward for their own faith development or a trustworthy source of information in the world. And so we want to provide resources and information to help people who feel like their own kind of intellectual quests have been sidelined in church spaces, to provide them content that's going to be meaningful for them. So all that within kind of an Anabaptist key. So yeah, that's me.
Love that. Yeah. I mean, I'm within a Baptist context, but I routinely say that the Anabaptists and the Mennonites get it right when it comes to peace. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good conversation for another day too, because I think in a lot of, especially in Mennonite spaces, peace can also be used as a weapon, and the veneer of certain types of peace in some spaces actually does violence in others, and so I wouldn't say we've gotten it right, but it's aspirational.
Yeah. Yes. Aspirationally right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I was thinking about this recently when I was on the Whole Church podcast,
Mhm.
and they were asking about like church unity and what's your final thoughts on this? And I was like, it was very counterintuitive, because I was like, know what your red lines are, because so often there's like we say unity, but it's actually just enablement. Like, don't mistake unity for enabling toxic, damaging things for this veneer of unity. I think it's the same with peace, right? It's like, oh, peace, brother. It's like, I think James had something to say about that. Like, what good is it you pronounce peace, go in peace with God, but like, the person you're speaking to walks away hungry, that's not peace. But
So just to kind of close the circle on that, the very first event that Humanitas did on campus was to bring noted Canadian author Rudy Weave to campus to give a reading on his most recent book. And Rudy burst on the scene in the 60s in the Canadian lit scene by his first novel called Peace Shall Destroy Many. And the premise of that book, it was set in a Mennonite community in northern Saskatchewan in the 40s during the Second World War. And basically, you had these conscientious objectors who were not going to war for their pacifist reasons. And yet, when you kind of pulled the curtain back, they were making a lot of money off of the war and profiting because, and so the protagonist in that book was this, young man, very earnest in his faith. And it was troubling him that they were profiting off the war effort. And he was kind of seeing a bit of duplicity there. And then in different, as you make your way through the book, they're like, oh, and also this, pacifist religious community was really not doing right by Indigenous people and was actually acting towards them in violent ways. Oh, and then you actually look at some of the church leadership structures and you pull the curtain back and you realize that there's actual physical violence that's being done, but it's never talked about, right?
yeah.
And so Rudy's book kind of in very evocative literary ways kind of told that story. And he, at the time, was the editor of the denominational magazine, the Mennonite Brethren Herald, and he lost his job over it because he was now telling stories out of school, even though they were certainly accurate portrayal of the way in which peace gets used as a weapon, right?
Yeah.
And so it was a real, joy to get to know him a little bit and to have him, read, from his most recent novel. And also, and he himself had made his peace, even though when he lost his job, he had to go teach, he had to move his family to the States for a teaching job, totally uprooted his life, eventually made his way back to Canada. And, found his way back into a Mennonite Brethren church where he, has been a member all these years. But it was, it was an interesting kind of launch to the Humanitas kind of venture and on themes of peace and just the way it gets complicated very, very, very quickly.
Yeah. Well, this is like deep cut, localize theology talk here. But since this is inspired by personalism, I think it's worth getting into a tiny bit, and then we'll get to you, Brother Tripp. But for people who aren't familiar with the area, like we're in like the greater Vancouver area, but we're in Langley, which is like suburbs, and you're getting into like rural farmland. And then you go a little bit further, you get to Abbotsford, which is like a lot of farmland. And one of the things that really has become evident to me in it related to what you're saying is just watch what happens when you talk to Mennonite landowners about land acknowledgements.
Oh, yeah.
Like
hmm
very quickly, like it's a real trigger, right? Because it's like, well, all land is God's land. It's like, cool. But you realize when you migrated here under very difficult circumstances
hmm
that the land that you received was actually stolen from people. And now the suggestion that you acknowledge that and your fear that it might be stolen from you is calling you to fall back on rhetoric as
hmm
compared to just the basic confession that the land that we're on is stolen, right? It's like it's the substructural violence that
hmm
we kind of just like paste over.
Well, and the fact that a lot of the farmland around Abbotsford is only farmland because they drained a lake that was there, which totally disrupted the local economies for the Indigenous groups.
Yeah.
And there was some headlines maybe 2-3 years ago about, in the wake of flooding that had happened, where some were suggesting, well, maybe we should actually remove the farmers from that land and just bring the lake back because that would, stabilize the ecosystem. And of course, the farmers were not in favor of that because it would dispossess them from the land that they had this connection to, right? Which is it's such a 180 relative to like, well, how did you get the land in the first place?
It's like a boring Canadian version of Yellowstone Trip.
No, the idea that where you start the timeline determines who gets to be the victim.
Right.
Right. That is there are other parts of the world where that same problem occurs.
Really?
Yeah. Where if you just feel like, no, this is ours, because this is where I start telling the story.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is a good spot for you to share a little bit about yourself and why you are here. So you're speaking at a number of things associated with what Myron just described. But yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're going to be speaking on, and then like let's get into it
Oh,
because I think it's
so
very timely subject matter.
yeah. Sadly, the the lecture I wrote and sent to him a while ago feels more and more timely. Um, although we're just walking into a 2 week uh 2 weeks of peace in Iran.
Hmm.
Um, but I think that domination systems call lulls of violence peace and want us to be happy about it. Um, but yeah, so Tripp, I do the Homebrewed Christianity podcast and a bunch of other things. I teach at Luther Seminary, and I love both of these guys. So very happy to be here doing a lecture thing tonight on nonviolence as an accurate metaphysical description, and then doing some other conversations around theological education, online stuff, and alternative faith communities, and whatever else Myron has me showing up for.
Okay.
But can I ask you? I had thought of something connected to y'all's conversation.
Yeah.
You can be like, "No, Tripp, don't steal my podcast." But uh, I'm like two
It's not my
chapters.
podcast; it's the Lord's.
Oh, well, in that case, he's
Mhm.
totally cool with me doing
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
Okay, so I'm almost done with like I have 11 of 13 chapters for the first draft of my big Bonhoeffer book done.
Yeah.
And that's the name of it. It's the Big Bonhoeffer book.
Love it.
Yeah,
The Big Beautiful Bonhoeffer book.
big beautiful bond,
Triple B.
big
Be
beautiful
cute.
bond. Not as yeah. Anyway, um, but one of the stories in the book that I've like got more and more into is the Bonhoeffer's relationship with the ecumenical community around peace, and his fight for the recognition that the confessing church is the actual church in Germany,
Hmm.
and the ecumenical movement is uncomfortable picking sides, right? So they're like, well, you got the real reps from the German Christian church going to ecumenical gatherings, and the confessing church is coming, and the so there's this transition point in his story. It's before the war breaks out, but Germany's rearming, which that's taking place, and he got sent to London, where he's pastoring two congregations, and uh, they thought, well, if we send him over here, he'll cause less trouble. And this is right after he wrote the Bethel Confession. Then by the time it gets done being edited by confessing church people, it's so watered down, he won't sign it. And so he's over there. This is when Bart writes uh, um, the the Barman Confession, which again is addressing ethnic Jews in the church, but not largely the Jewish question. And they're trying to get everyone on the same page. And he's he's kind of on the radical edge of the confessing church. Well, he sees in London, Heckel gets sent, who's like the head of the German Christian church in Germany, and told him like, look, you need to chill. Um, you're not supposed to be talking about any of this stuff. We've heard some of your sermons. And we're going to need you to go into timeout if you're going to keep using, talking about peace this way, which was not, I mean, there's nothing about Bonhoeffer that says
Nobody puts baby Bonhoeffer.
that's like asking him to escalate,
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm sure he's like a Enneagram 8. It was just like, you're telling me to escalate. So then he had been invited to Fano, but wasn't sure he was going to go. The big ecumenical gathering right on the turn of war in Europe. And he found out that the German delegation's coming from the German Christian church. And he starts lobbying Fano that you have to have the confessing church there, or you won't have a Christian representative from Germany. So
Shots fired.
So they decide they're going to, because they want church unity.
Right.
The ecumenical movement wants church unity in scare quotes. We're going to have both come.
Okay.
So you got a bunch of Nazi church people and the confessing church there. And once Haeckel found out after he'd reprimanded Bonhoeffer that Bonhoeffer's going, he decides he's going. And he gives this long, exhaustive church unity speech that basically was like, do Christians in France really need to have an opinion if ethnically Jewish people who are Lutheran ministers in Germany can't serve the Eucharist and baptize anyone because they got a little Jew blood in them, but that's how we do it. But we don't have any opinions about what you do in France. And you Swedes, y'all have some weird stuff. Like, we're all different and we should all be together. That is adiaphora. And he gives this huge speech of adiaphora. And he did not want Bonhoeffer or anyone from the confessing church getting up there. And Bonhoeffer was like, part of my agreement for coming was that I get to talk. So they give him the smallest talking bit. He gets up there and basically torches the room where he said, when Jesus gave us a command for peace, and I don't think it was a suggestion, and it's just where you get some of those lines where he said, our task isn't to decide if it's applicable. Our decision is, what does it look like? And if the call for unity means binding the conscience of the church to the protection of violence, then you are no longer the church. So he ends by telling the rest of Europe, you should identify the German confessing church. It's the only true church in Germany. And it didn't go over well at home. But I say that because it was at this moment when he gets to London that he and one of his friends who lost his job because he had Jewish heritage, and he takes him basically as an associate minister in Germany. And they write a new catechism. And in the catechism, they make it explicit that the Jewish question is not adiaphora. You can't be a member of the body of Christ and be like, let's have church unity around the Jewish question. It is a status confessionis, is the full affirmation and the dignity of the Jewish people.
I'm not familiar with that term, adiaphora. What is?
So like in theological conversations, like the magisterial reformers.
Lowly philosopher here. So break down the theological.
Yeah. So it means like we all debate about it. So that was so Luther, Calvin, yelling at each other, and then they're like, swinging Jesus, that's symbolic stuff. You can't mess with that.
Right.
And then Melanchthon's like, let's take a deep breath, friends. Luther leaves because he's angry, and he's like, how about? This is like, there's just different ways of seeing this. We can all hang out together because it's adiaphora. It's not essential to the faith. Like, do we all like, there are three persons in the Trinity? I mean, what argue about the Spirit and the Son process? Like, we'll all get along. It's adiaphora. Like, you have to have, like, every system's going to have an internally consistent.
It's kind of like Hakuna Matata.
It's like, but so like the adiaphora thing, like, we all think the cross works, forgiveness of sins, but the creed doesn't say which atonement theory. Some of you still hung up on some beautiful, loving versions. Like, you have to do the penal, do it. But like, we like Christus Victor, or we like it's adiaphora. It's not we're not going to break unity over this. But then there's it's a status confession. It means like, no, this is a line for our confession. Like, you're not confessing Christ if you think the church gets to decide who can perform a baptism because your state tells you no one can perform a baptism if they got a drop of Jewish blood in them. That you're letting your racist state tell you who baptizes someone into the body of the Jewish Christ. Like, that's no longer Christian. And the solution, just like, it's the theological appeasement, much like, Chamberlain or what, like, we're trying to avoid wars. We want peace. So we're going to we want to have a we want everyone to feel cool in the room. Why do we have to have this be a
But that's an exact illustration of peace destroying others.
Yeah, that's why I was saying,
Yeah.
like, y'all's examples was very much this part of Canada. It's not like we don't understand other issues, right? And I think, y'all are Canadians, so you don't bear this burden, but I'm writing a very large check to the government this week for taxes, and in America, and I know I'm contributing $17,000 this year to a war machine that uses my religious tradition's language for assassinations of leaders under the pretense of negotiations for peace, genocidal threats towards people, equipping other nation states to do rather vile things in Christ's own land that are counter to anything like what there's this. America experiences it in this intense way, just like farmers, like when your description, like we really want to be loving and care about this kind of stuff, but we also don't want the privilege we're inheriting from the domination system of the world problematized. So here's where we start the timeline. Here are the assumptions about power and givenness. And so let's figure out the nicest version where the power, privilege, and prestige and inheritance of being at the top of a pecking order is not problematized. And that kind of appeasement by naturalizing for the church a world where all of a sudden I spend more of my money in this year building crosses for people in Iran or in Palestine or in Syria. Like you start going that, then feeding my neighbors, or we cut to where 20 million kids that now are under the poverty limit and lost access to healthcare in America, and we're closing rural hospitals because of the Doge and the big beautiful bill. And so like the rural poor members of my family will have to, if they have a health emergency, have to drive 2 hours to get there. But we could spend $400 billion in the last 2 weeks bombing stuff where no one voted for it. Right. You know what I mean? Like, so like this situation is one where the example of Bonhoeffer, the example of even farmers at a local level, I think one of the gifts the Peace Church gives is it looks at the life of Jesus and the teachings of Jesus and kind of makes everyone uncomfortable in this way Bonhoeffer did there and go like, no, like, I mean, you're welcome to ignore him, but are we really going to act like we're being faithful? Like, there's not a lot of ambiguity. When he said, blessed are the peacemakers, he didn't think that's a great name for a missile. And that is what Boeing thought.
Yeah.
And then we pay for them.
For really disturbing propaganda reels on Instagram using that verse with elite forces, repelling from helicopters and night vision and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, going back to the history you laid out and that long speech about, should we really worry about what's going on over there? Like, let's focus on our own family. That's just the question of Cain reiterated.
Mhm.
I'm my brother's keeper? Yeah. Or later, when the lawyer is like trying to trip Jesus up and says, and who is my neighbor? And Jesus is like, I'll tell you who your neighbor is. Those are just reiterations of those questions. And the answer is actually your neighbor is the person who is beat up and on the side of the road who, you've been taught to like avoid or you instinctually avoid. And then the one person who actually cares is the one person that you were raised to hate because of all this history and bad blood. And that's the radicality of the discipleship that we're called to. And that does require a costly piece, to sort of riff on Bonhoeffer's costly grace idea, right? It's a costly piece. And this is where I'm an ethicist, so when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But this is where the ethics of peace become really important, where the ethics of neighborliness and loving your enemy uh, really grow legs and become challenging. Because I, like I said, in terms of church unity in general, I'll say here, Jesus doesn't say don't have an enemy. Like, he acknowledges that there
Yeah.
is an enemy, and he calls us to love them. And so at times, especially Canadians, unless it's ice hockey, and then we're insane, insanely violent, and we're like, we just kind of like avoid conflicts, right? But there is actually like a an acknowledgement that no, if you follow Jesus, there are going to be people that hate you, and you're actually uh, going to at a certain point be like, "There's a wolf, there's a wolf, there's a wolf," and I love that wolf, but I also don't just sort of like, can't we all just get along, right? But then, okay, so then the question becomes, who's the enemy, and how do we love them in a way that leads to the type of transformation that we hope to see. Like, if the end is peace, what means do we use to get there?
Mhm.
It is the question. And I know that I was gonna say, like, and how does this fit to the other part of your talk around like theological education, online education, formation, alternative learning communities? I'm like, actually, I do think that connects to that question of like being in an established institution, like it the pressures to just not make people uncomfortable leaves us with zero resources to answer these questions. And so we're we're kind of eating the bitter fruit of a few decades of theological educators avoiding the gray areas, the nitty-gritty, uncomfortable things, and we just kind of like end the conversation at systematics and pastoral care.
Mhm.
And then we just kind of like, well, there's this thing called practical theology and applied theology, but like they just muddy up the issue. I'm pretty sure the incarnation muddies up the issue too. But I don't know, maybe I'm shoehorning it into this, the whole reason why you're here, but like I actually think this pathological inability to like sort through some of these questions regarding peace, unity, division, and blatant ignoring of scripture, and strangely within traditions that say scripture is authoritative, full stop. It's because we just didn't actually take the time to talk about the things that make us uncomfortable, and instead we want to have this centrist thing. But it's like, newsflash, the center is not holding anymore, right?
Yeah.
Your neutral position is actually a sign of your privilege, not your virtue. That's not a
Yes.
question, it's more of an
Well,
observation on what you two are saying.
yeah,
Then.
well,
Yeah.
here's something I've been thinking about, and it was something before I found out Myron wasn't going to respond tonight, that I was hopefully baiting him into bringing up, because the one of the challenges any minority opinion in a culture, whether it's like the West writ large or Christian culture, that like it could be transparent if you're wrestling with the tradition that this matters, but so much of our framework is kind of the shared interpretive habits of the people we're around. And there's a host of different cognitive mechanisms we have that lead to like habits of interpretation that have to be problematized. And Jesus is doing it in the parable you gave. This is what made it pop up, is he's like, I'm going to tell you a parable that answers the who is your neighbor question, that the thing that you'll figure out 10 minutes from now, right about when I'm far enough away for you not to come after me, is that my answer is, you're asking a question and you can never hear it because you've already interpreted the world as such, right? And I think one of the places for congregations and faith leaders of congregations where so much of the normative assumptions of the good in our kind of post-war consensus like one of the things we need to do is recognize the psychological structure of human beings and the kind of habits of our inheritance that need to be problematized in order for us to even respond to what the invitation of Jesus is, right? Like if we come in with our definite answers to who's a neighbor and who's an enemy, and we come in with what's allowed or not allowed, and then the spectrum of possibilities already rather shrunk. And so, like, as someone who spends a lot of time thinking about the psychological sciences and the cultural force of religion and narratives, like, what are those habits that are just constitutive of being human that we might need to think parabolically about in our own context to like give permission for the church and Christians to go, oh, there, like, there are other options available.
Mm, I think the short answer for me is there's just a lot of, cultural forces in this moment that just prevent people from having the time and space to think through, to ask questions like that might get them into more generous spaces, both theologically and existentially. They're just too busy trying to put food on the table and
Mm-hmm.
get kids to appointments and all sorts of other kind of things that crowd in life. But then those kind of gnawing, uh, trying to figure out how to deal with the fact that things seems to be going wrong in all these different areas. What are the resources that people can kind of draw on? And I think so some of the cultural habits that you're talking about, I think, are just kind of forced on people, and they don't really know, is there a different way? And then you go to the church, right? Or maybe you're coming from within a church space, and a lot of churches just are not equipped to meet people at really their point of need when it comes to actually giving them tools to help them think through a better way, and a different way. Because if the current way is not working for a variety of reasons, whether it's economically, existentially, spiritually, theologically, can church spaces actually be generative and liberative, to provide them resources to inhabit, what a more kind of Christ-like vision of what you're kind of painting out to say. And this is where I think the peace church tradition, for me, um, not to slogan it, but for me, what the Anabaptist peace church tradition can inject into every conversation in every theological space is a question, is to say, well, who has the power and how is it being distributed in ways that have impact on people who, are on the margins, right? I mean, those
Mm-hmm.
those to me are the two central kind of Anabaptist questions that need to be injected into every theological space. And if the answer is, power is concentrated in a select few for the privilege of a select few, this is a sign that something has gone wrong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would add the you're using the term parabolic or parable, but you was talking about narratives, and this reminds me of a conversation that um, really kind of got a lot of attention maybe about a month or a bit ago. But it was Trevor Noah's podcast, and he was talking about the sort of struggles and failure of the left, and he said something that surprised a lot of people and led to a lot of think pieces on Substack. But he was like, I think the problem is that the left lacks religion and a religious imagination. Not that he was like, okay, everybody needs to just like pick a religion and that's going to solve the problems. But he was like, the infighting, the esoteric terms, getting the terms like, make sure we use this term, not that, like uh the all of that coupled with an impoverished imagination, which leads to a thin story or no story at all, means that we are losing the story war,
Mm-hmm.
because we talk about blessed are the peacemakers being pasted on this propaganda footage. Or there was another one um, after the Venezuela events, right? It was just Trump getting off a plane and it had the caption FAFO,
Mhm,
F around and find out. And then there was the other one where it was like all these different movies, like, Tony Stark and
mhm.
Marvel movie mashups. And, you know, I'm pretty sure that all of us are kind of like, we don't vibe on that. But the honest reality is there are a lot of people who see that and they're like, that's awesome. That's an adventure. That's like, this is great. This is a great story. We're bringing freedom. We're bringing justice. We're bringing peace to the world. And
Mm.
yeah, like, okay, a few people have to die, but like, this is all for a greater good. And I can judge that all I want. But apparently that story is very compelling to people. And so then the critical question becomes for people like us who see through that, well, what story are we telling? And I think about this too, like in terms of the Beatitudes, or even further back, like the way that Luther deals with the commandments. One of the little shifts I talk about is like, yeah, they're commandments, but what if we heard them as promises?
Hmm.
Like, what if we heard the, it's not just a list of rules about like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, right? But actually there's a future tense in it where it's like, he's not saying just don't kill your neighbor, but because of who I am, you don't have to.
Mm.
And meanwhile, we're like, but I kind of want to, right? And say the Beatitudes, they're like, yes, they are proclamations of a current reality that is coming into being, but they're also promises. And so one of the sort of epistemological shifts that I feel like I'm making a lot, just how I talk like in conversations like these or teaching, is like when I talk about peacemaking, or when I talk about like going to where Jesus is with the, the widow, the orphan, the sojourner, the prisoner, uh, it's not like God is telling us, his kids, you have to eat your vegetables in order to eat dessert or brisket. Like, you got to eat the vegetable. It's like, no, this is the brisket. This is the dessert. Like, spend enough time here, and you don't realize that, like, we have to, we get to. I'm in the kingdom now, right?
Mhm.
But to put all of that in the form of a question, how do we tell that story in a way that sticks? Because I don't feel like, at least for me, I don't know about you guys, but like, is that story sticking?
I think one of the bad habits of contemporary, I mean, this is just Western thought in general, but in religion, everything has been so flattened to the individual that the individual bears a host of burdens, one of which is like the justification of everything they believe, right? So
Mhm.
that's, what all of Christendom used to give you graciously, you now have to legitimate for yourself. So like there's one element, but then when you get to like questions of ethics, the individual is, the dominant narrative is one that you're ultimately responsible for your situation. And so, like, when you think, I mean, even what you were just saying that connects with what you were saying is like when you go to raise some of these questions in a congregation setting, you're we address it as if every individual now is supposed to answer this question of peace, and each one of them is under the same larger modern uh, framing narrative where like to hold your place in the world, you have to be getting faster. You have to be getting more efficient. You have to be acquiring, and we now have a whole group of parents who know that the conditions for their kids and grandkids are worse than it was for them.
Mhm.
So if you just want them to have the quality of life you have, they have to outcompete their generational peers at winning a game that sucks your soul out, right? So you like, what is this unique feature of late modernity? Is that the number of people that use the phrase burnout. And that is like the consequence that we're in. One of the uh, Hartmut Rosa, the German sociologist, talks about it's like you're on an escalator that's coming down and you're going up it, and you just have to keep walking faster in order to stay in the same place. Uh, and and so now it's your burden. You have to keep walking. It reminds me of the situation in Egypt when Moses is talking to God about going back. I need to know who you are. Like, you're gonna have to tell me and things you don't understand. And God's like, I heard their cries and stuff. Well, what occasioned it was Pharaoh going, build more bricks. Now don't use straw, right? Like the demands are here. The resources for you to do it are going down. And in the meantime, we're going to kill half your kids.
Mhm.
Right. And I think a lot of people, then if you think it in that individualistic framing, will hear, well, we're supposed to be peacemakers. And they'll look at you as the minister and be like, are you asking me to add one more thing
Right.
on here? And don't you understand that I have to get my kid to outcompete enough of his peers to get into a school that charges 3 times as much as it did when I went there? And, yeah, do I like my life? Am I overworked? Do I enjoy things? No. But you know what I will? I will eventually when I retire. And I want them to eventually retire. So it's hard to really be involved in the church because they also have to compete for what they're going to put on their resume when they're applying for their scholarships. So we're going to do that. But you know what I mean? So we're going to outcompete so they can have their soul sucked out in a machine that constantly makes more demands. And they can burn out just like me. But I'd hate for them to be what happens if you don't join the burnout cycle, is that now you're a non-human and you don't even matter to the system. And you're asking me on top of that to feel a little bit guilty that a bunch of my tax money went to blow a whole bunch of people up over there and I'm supposed to do something about it? Really, Reverend. And I think that's there. And that's just how it plays out at the individual level. We look at how our growing relationship to institutions. We want to burn them down. They don't work. We know all the problems that are sitting there, and no one is invested in the narratives those stories are telling that find it redemptive. It's just a cycle of hypocrisy where people are exchanging chairs and dying institutions. Theological education is one of them. So we're going to burn down our institutions. Democracy's having a problem. The market's having a problem. And the while, all the accelerating energy of our system is burning up a planet.
Not higher education, though. That's safe, isn't it?
Yeah. We're really invested in the humanities and the formation of great citizen stewards and neighbors. But when you think of that, we're like burning out people, burning down institutions, and burning up a planet. If the proclamation of the gospel is continued to be shrunk to some good news about an individual so that you can I don't know, be a nicer person as you're burning out or be a slightly better parent or whatever, then how good a news is it? And so I think one of the elements Protestantism needs to jettison is that over-fixation on the individual that first emerged because we're justifying our beliefs and we're going to make this primary. But if you study much religion, beliefs come second anyway. Ritual, narrative, formation, community, all those things become prior. And if the proclamation of the gospel adopts modernity's form of individualism and atomism, then individuals will bear the burden of a system of death. And our solution is let us figure out how to build more bricks with less straw. Not actually, you need a whole new law. Pharaohs kills people. Idols demand death. And so the proclamation is to the whole people to have it to walk under a different form. Right. And I think we're increasingly getting to the point that it is hard even for plenty of people that are, happily in the middle class in the West who are starting to recognize what plenty of the crucified people around the world have known for a while, that what we called the peaceable post-war situation, that your prime minister was telling the truth a couple months ago before he took it back, that this was a set of hypocrisies that gave us certain privileges, and we're all going to repeat the story. But now, half the people he went to school with, kids, can't get it. And what does the church do when that's the case? Did you see Jack? Started Twitter and his company. He preemptively laid off half of their workers because of the introduction of AI of his new company. And he said he wanted to do it because this is what's going to happen. And he thinks that enough of the companies understand that, so they're just going to not hire new and slowly let people leave, right? Even though you could replace their labor electronically already. And if that's true for half the industries where middle-class people in the West are employed, we're 20 years out of an even further tightening of the middle class in the West that will put a large number of people in a precarious economic system who are supposedly paying, and those are the ones serving and dying to force this structure on the world. That is a situation, I think, where the more collective and the more peace-building vision of the gospel is actually responding to the lived experience of more and more people. And there's a striking parallel between even the situation in Galilee when Jesus took off. You get the harnessing of the Lake of Galilee for the harvesting of food to be shipped to Rome and fish. And now all these fishermen that were comfortably had sustained life are now no longer allowed to, use their lake and things without paying or it all going to Rome.
Fish on Sabbath.
Yeah. And now what happens? Jesus goes and moves over across, and there's traction. All of a sudden, the prophetic tradition of Israel has traction to a whole new set of precarious lives because of an economic system of an imperial order. And then who does he call?
Okay, so you're saying that the message of Jesus is economic good news for the poor?
Yes.
Wow.
And the ones that historically, when you look at revolutionary movements, peace movements and things, the ones who identify the system as toxic are the ones where there's a generational change where I had the benefits of the system and now me or my kids don't. What's going on? This is wrong.
But there's a way of framing the gospel, particularly in North America, that the message for the poor is, well, it's delayed gratification, right? So you don't expect things to change materially all that much now, but in the afterlife, it's going to be great.
Zippity doo-dah.
Means of you will always have the poor with you,
Right?
as if
For
that's
sure,
like
for sure.
the creator, sustainer, redeemer of the cosmos endorsing systems of oppression. He's actually saying you need to take care of these people because there are principalities and powers that are keeping people in this spot. But just the interesting thing is, to me though, is that's the story. And part of that story too is I'm thinking of all these moments when Jesus is dealing with finances, wealth, power, like the systems that are attached to them. Like he completely relativizes them and treats them like dirt, right? So of course there's the famous, what should we do? Paying taxes usually, like, give me a coin. Oh, okay, cool. Don't worry. But then also too, when Peter's got to pay his taxes, like, go find a fish with some money in it. You're like, what the heck? Like that is, those are instances of like, this is actually the new kingdom or Trinitarian economy that we're being invited into. And you either hear that as good news or you hear that as bad news and you do everything you can to stop it. But you can't. But I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about Kierkegaard lately, and this state that you're describing, of burnout. I think the word that I've been reflecting on a lot is Kierkegaard's understanding of anxiety or dread. Right? It's this weight. It's this existential. Like, I was actually doing some writing last night. It's sort of like Taylor's Imminent Frame, but worse, in the sense of like, not only is the idea of some sort of transcendent beyond the material that is purposeful, like purposive, let alone personal, like the idea of that is unimaginable. We're in a situation where people, like, they may actually have the idea of that, and yet their reality is such that they can't experience that beyond. It's like a suffocating, enclosed, like, I rationally believe that God is here and doing something and that what you're talking about will come to fulfillment. But on the ground right now, I feel the weight of this feeling that it's not going to happen. And this is where Kierkegaard comes in, because like everybody will argue about what he actually meant. But he's like, anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. But the way that I'm interpreting it, tell me if I'm wrong, but here, or if you like it or don't like it, but I think what way I'm reading that is this anxiety it's the same anxiety that Egypt feels when they have been liberated from captivity. They're in the desert and it's getting tricky and they want to go back to slavery. Right? It's the disorientation of like, I am actually being brought into freedom. I'm being brought into this new reality, this new life, this new freedom, as I'm like, covenanting with this God that has chosen me and freed me from this really awful situation. And yet it's getting hard, and there's no existing categories for what I'm going through, and it disorients me, and I just want to go back to pretending like the middle class is growing, not shrinking, you know? I feel like that's the dizziness and disorientation that a lot of people feel, is like some people are willing to entertain the idea that something is wrong and significantly inconsistent with the Christianity that a lot of people claim to, believe in and follow. And then there's other people, like the thought of just admitting that it's broken and that there has to be a better way is terrifying and disorienting. I don't know. What do you make of that? Do I feel like I'm sort of describing the existential situation in a helpful way?
The also had two different directions pop in my head. One, well, on the like Kierkegaard on the dizziness of freedom bit, I think part of what he's getting at is there's both like once you're unmoored from the obligations of inheritance, right? Like of like when you're, what do you do with your finitude when you are seizing authorship of it, right? And so the like when he tells the movement from like the aesthetic stage to the moral stage to then like the night of faith and this kind of thing, right? The purity of heart being to will one thing is something about like what is like you if you shed the inheritance of all these obligations, Judge Williams, like, come on, this really helps you out. Like you like
Look at the stocks, Tripp.
yeah, you got
Stocks are up.
yeah,
Right.
stock
Right.
market's over 50,000.
Mhm.
I'm sure it went up because we have our new peace plan.
Mhm.
But there, there's something about like the anxiety of finding new fascinations that is resolved by taking an ordered life. And Judge Williams, like, see, buddy, this is what's called growing up, you know. But then there's this other sense that you're now like outsourcing your decision to these habits of inheritance that are problematic. And he problematized Kierkegaard, a number of them, obviously Christendom being one of the main features. And then, so what is it? What do you do with freedom if it's not always pursuing immediate gratification or binding itself with complete choices? And now you're being determined from the outside. Like the transition is that whole risk of one's finitude or like the orientation of one's faith towards something singular, so that you aren't deciding every day, who am I? You've decided where your orientation, and that frees you from this kind of constant burden of, I guess the language we could use in the present is like naming your authentic self and then discovering it and this kind of thing. That it's like, this is what I'm giving my life to. And there's a kind of purity to it that you're no longer self-authoring yourself daily. You're enacting a self because you've decided I'm risking my finitude in this way. And the like the conditions for thinking that is plausible are really hard when what you're pushing back against isn't a perverse Christendom in Denmark, where you're like, well, if everyone's won, no one's won. Now you're pushing back against a context where there is, like if you think of like how McIntyre talks about it, where like the question of the good life is now all oriented towards the domain of the individual. And then when it goes into the public square, we're in a multi-religious, multi-ethnic plurality of narratives. And now you're tasked with deciphering this whole thing and working it out. But then the consequences of it, of what it looks like to do it in public, become problematic the moment the language or the tradition of the claims problematize others. And so you're like, oh, what does a detraditioned people look like? That, like, I think that dizziness of freedom has a different kind of vertigo when you've gone from Christendom without Christ to one context to post Christendom and mini Christ, or many narratives. but Kierkegaard's kind of uh, framing of faith is like, it's not a whole list of, and you said, use the language earlier, not what is it, these things that I have to do. And now you're always doing a calculation of what do I have to do to here, what do I have to do here. But here's what you get to do, because I've like found freedom precisely in limiting options, because this is what I'm giving myself to. It's like the freedom that comes with marriage, or when you become a parent, or like there's a binding that is liberating, because you've now said, I show up for this.
Right. So, two things. I've been getting into a lot of the psych literature on meaning and meaning making. And so in psychology, there's kind of a convergence around this idea that existential meaning really is a function of your ability to kind of make sense of your world, and to locate kind of how and in what ways you matter in a particular scenario. And if you can kind of embed that within a goal-directed sense of purpose, right? An event is going to go. Um, uh, it's going to be meaningful to you if all those three things. Now we can do whatever we want, right? Because Michael's not
Let's
here.
say
We
the
can
three
just kind of
things
like,
again.
okay, so coherence, significance, and purpose,
Okay.
right? So localize it to a particular event. An event's going to be meaningful for you in the psychological perspective. If there's no glaring contradictions in it, but also if it helps you kind of make sense of your world, it's like, oh, I can see how things kind of fit. And if you are located in that event in a way that shows you in what ways you matter and to whom you
Mm-hmm.
matter, and so it's got significance for you. And then if it also kind of makes sense within a goal directed kind of purposeful, it aligns with a sense of goal directedness or purpose. And so I think uh, a lot of psychologists who kind of think about the, anxiety and other sorts of ills that are in kind of this late modernity. There's a crisis of meaning making
Mm-hmm.
because the systems that are there, um, you know, pr- uh, don't necessarily do a good job of letting you know how and in what ways you matter and to whom, and also, don't provide a set of goals that are worth pursuing that actually fit with your values or contribute to your own flourishing. And so I think that, like Michael's question earlier about the Trevor Noah podcast and where, the left has a hard time with religion. I mean, if you look at, lots of these militaristic Christian movements, they score high on meaning because they provide a worldview and a framework that everything kind of fits, so long as you screen off certain bits of information and values
Mm-hmm.
discussions, but it's a very airtight kind of coherent system. It shows you exactly why you matter and in what, and also the purpose that, we're going to make this country great again, right? And so you're fitting into this larger story, and and I think one of the challenges is if you're not buying into that framework, uh, you can't just, replace it with nothing. And I think the question earlier about, what's the story, what's the narrative, I think, and this is where I think peace church traditions do have an opportunity to reset the narrative in a way that's authentic to the tradition in this particular key, but to say, there's a different way of making sense of things, right? There's a different way of looking at what's going on, and in a way that accounts for a wider set of data, and we can tell a story about what's going on that isn't incoherent. And you can also tell a different story about values, which is to say, and some people might say that you matter in this way, but actually, we're going to draw on this other kind of Christian tradition and show actually that you matter for these reasons and in this way. And the circle of who is significant, the circle of who matters, is just widened,
Mm-hmm.
beyond current scopes in a way that I think people will find hesitant. The challenge, though, is to say, well, okay, but what is the goal? What is the purpose, right? And I think there are ways of telling. Uh, uh, you know the aspirational community that we're trying to build both locally and globally, that is a compelling purpose to work towards, and is a way that is inclusive, is a way that draws on a wider set of values, and also authentically draws on the Christian traditions. We're just talking about, is there a way for, like you had asked about, the the problem that sometimes the left has with religion. But I do think that there is a way of using this kind of meaning-making language and framework that does justice to both the tradition, but also the current moment, and just widens the circle of, telling a different story of making sense of our moment, telling a different story about who matters and why, and painting a different purpose, a full society that we want to build that's going to be good for all, right?
Mhm.
And I think, you know, the yeah. So that was kind of just one comment. I also want to ask for kind of your thoughts. I don't know how much longer we're going to be going here, but how do you think all of this kind of plays out uniquely within that population of people who have left their religion, people who have deconstructed in ways that they've come to see that their religious heritage, maybe their evangelical kind of ecosystem in which they grew up, just doesn't align with their values anymore, doesn't provide a space that's healthy for them in their own kind of trying to deal with the present moment, and they just are trying to figure out a different way. And so how do you think that these kinds of larger concerns that we're talking about, like global economics and anxiety in the current moment, and where does uh, theological spaces and theological education kind of fit? How does it deal with that specific population?
Question. Well, you do get half the people at most seminaries are going there just to process that.
Right.
Like if you go back in time, um, this is a conversation I had where I guess I shouldn't. Okay, there's a school that I was speaking at for a lecture series,
Right.
and the meal there were 3 retired former presidents or deans
Yeah.
there, along with the contemporary ones, and we were having a conversation about this, and one of them, this guy's late 80s,
Okay.
been retired for years, and he said, when I started working here as an associate faculty member, uh, the
In the Reagan administration.
maybe before that, I don't know, like, yeah, he's like, I finished my PhD at Yale, and I came here and was here my whole career. I was like a junior faculty member, and our students came because they were going to be clergy for our denomination. And then by the time I got to be dean, our students came here because they were from our denomination. They're going to do something religious, maybe, and they don't know what it's going to be exactly, but this is where they're going to figure out their calling. And some of them might do any of the helping professions or social work or
NGOs.
ministry or who knows. And he's like, and now the students come because they would rather go to seminary than counseling. And they're figuring out if they believe anything.
Mhm.
And as they do, they'll figure out if they're going to do anything vocational about it. Right. And I think that when you think of the generational shift, there's a parallel one of what's happened at the congregational level, that the ones who've imbibed the tradition such that their self-exploration in early adulthood is at a seminary. But it's not like they already think, I'm grounded in this tradition, right?
Mhm.
The story of intelligibility. I am a person whose life has meaning, and now I'm going to find the resources to operate within a tradition and narrative
Mhm.
towards contributing and some goal-oriented flourishing. And this is how I both connect to my tradition, equip and orient myself, and explore this tradition so I could be an active agent that's flourishing. It's like I'm going to get 90 graduate school hours to figure out if I want to be in one.
Right.
And so like when you that has like what's ATS, our accrediting institution, supposed to do if just who you're serving and the questions are asking are that different, while the institutions doing it have the same obligations I always had. You're supposed to be training clergy for your denomination or the denominations that are connected to you, but who's coming doesn't even know if they might want to be one yet. And like I've had this whole conversation broke out where I joked that when I was in Edinburgh, was teaching the philosophy of religion class, and you have uh, the divinity school there is like all the religion people. I didn't know that till I got there. I'm like, how are there 800 and some divinity students in Scotland, are there even enough churches for all these? They're like, no, only 20 of them are going to be clergy. It's like, so, but then you also had other
And of those 20, probably only 10 should be. Is that what you're
saying? Well, that's generous. But but you also had any graduate religion students who are taking philosophy of religion, and philosophy department people, and linguistics and humanities, and so you have like every religious tradition imaginable, and then people that are taking it to disprove God. And I had a student who, said, well, okay, well, I guess I believe in God now. So what do I do next? And like, I was like, that's interesting, right? Like that you came to the divinity school and you're taking the philosophy of religion class, and then they're like, so do I have to switch my program now? And what about that room makes sense for whether or not you that's an odd environment for deciding orientation of one's existence in this, like, the most abstract environment possible, where you're doing, and then she's like, yeah, well, my family, like half of them are this tradition and others are this. And so she's asking me, like, should I join one of these churches, or my Muslim side of my family?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are there progressive Muslims in Edinburgh? And like, you're asking, like, I'm thinking, do you know my other peers that could have been teaching this class would be creeped out, just even that a 22-year-old's like, well, now I've decided I believe in God, I should go find one.
Mm-hmm.
That is just not, for most of church history, whether or not you believed in God just wasn't even a question. They'd have been like, what's that mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's a relatively new thing. And then where you grew up, there's generally a dominant expression of the church, or maybe two. And if you're in the radical Reformation side, you get chased out of all of them. And you have deep suspicions towards all the magisterial reformers and their Catholic forefathers. But, like, to me, that, like, the cultural conditions are so different. And it was like the abstract philosophical context gave me permission to finally think there's something to be gained by participating in a particular tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't exactly know what that means, except that there's something. We used to think philosophy of religion was what really nerdy people did, but like her existential questions were philosophy of religion questions that, until she had wrestled with those, she could not participate in a robust way in a confessional tradition.
But I mean,
does that make sense?
It makes sense, and it's not surprising to me. I mean, one of the courses I teach, and I've taught almost a dozen times, is an upper level philosophy of religion class, undergrad class called Suffering and Belief in God. And it's a fairly technical philosophical exploration in kind of an analytic philosophy of religion tradition. We read some kind of historical texts, but we do a little bit of modal logic. We do a variety of really, in my view, kind of interesting, but some abstract kind of philosophical thought. But I try and kind of frame it in a way that is intelligible for, existential questions of suffering and meaning. And the first time I taught this class, I had a student fairly early on in the semester come to see me at office hours and said, she signed up for the class because her parents had died, right? But in fairly close order. And she was just trying to make sense of it all. And that was my, oh crap moment. Like, this is just my own naive nature as a new professor, but it never would have occurred to me that a person would sign up for the class based on the title to help them make sense of their lives, right? I was just super excited to go through this tradition of super interesting analytic philosophy, and this really great kind of story that we could tell about how the trajectory of dealing with theodicy and the free will defense and, possible world semantics and all this cool stuff. But
modal logic,
100%.
Resolving grief since day one.
Yeah, well, at least since, when did Plantinga publish the free will defense? But I digress. So and I don't think this is an optimistic bias, but based on, and I've had a few students come to me in those moments over the years, uh, taking the course for that reason, and they've all found it helpful, right?
Hmm.
And there's a way in which that kind of more technical, um, removed from like the pastoral kind of concern to say, well, your God needed an angel, so took your parents, right? Or, well, clearly there's a purpose in it, and let me tell you what it is, right?
Oh,
Or clearly there's a purpose in it. We just, we'll know someday, right? Just to give a different set of tools to process their experience. And so maybe that person that you were talking to, whatever wherever they had come to in their own kind of existential thinking about God and meaning and purpose and those sorts of things, just needed a different set of tools to be able to kind of help them think that through. But
because the feature of it that I think, you mentioned like the question of the imminent frame before you did the dizziness,
Mhm,
freedom. Part of our situation is like how we're structured psychologically. It's
mhm,
not going to be satisfied with a purely imminent plane. The those questions of orientation, intelligibility, direction, those kind of things are at least demand a kind of thickness. The public square's rational account
mhm,
is not friendly with. But like there's something about the existential givenness of human beings, like the questions that show up transculturally
mhm.
for human beings about like finitude, what is good, what is all the questions inspire a whole Platonic dialogue. Like humans have asked those, all the wisdom traditions ask them,
Mhm,
and um and like part of a increasingly atomized world and denarrativized one um, in late modernity means that those questions show up, and the place in which you perform the questions, where they're treated with the both the significance of them and are treated in a like there's a kind of respect they're given when like the philosopher of religion's doing it in a way that if you're operating from within a particular tradition, uh, it already feels so weighted.
mhm,
And even though for most of human history, it's not like those questions aren't what human beings do when they hang out around a campfire. That's just how we do it. It's just now around the campfire are multiple wisdom traditions, multiple different sciences investigating it in different ways, greater awareness of the tragedy of history, like all these kinds of things that are sitting there when you're asking the questions. And what does it look like when we are detethered from communities, but tasked with answering questions like the framing of them as a philosopher of religion, I think is like it becomes uh I don't know, it has purchase in ways that even 50 years ago you didn't,
mhm,
and I think that's to me as a church leader, like especially when I was working in congregations, I found uh there was a deeper participation by people who in Christian ed and stuff explored those questions, how I would do it if I was at my day job teaching philosophy of religion. Now I'm doing it, introducing it, showing how different traditions have handled it, like how you think through it, engaging science and philosophy and stuff. Uh, because I think a lot of, there's been this habit of like if you think of one, like a nice chart, there's like the intensity of belief chart
mhm.
and the plausibility, the XY axis.
You want to avoid the people that are there.
Yeah. But if you're thinking of your different affirmations,
Mhm,
how you would plot them, like I'm like on the it'll be much higher on the plausibility for there is an ultimate reality.
mhm.
Ultimate reality is no less than personal. Well, that's not as intense as this.
Right.
That that the valuation of moment to moment correlates to potential enactment of the divine mind is higher than that, like you can help people think about it.
What about your particular atonement theory? Where is that on the scale?
Well, at the eschaton, it's all the way in that top one
Yeah.
when God is all in all. Then, but I just say that because like I think philosophers of religion teach like both of that, the plausibility element, right? Like credibility, like that you're thinking and engaging it.
Right.
And a philosopher of religion's like, but it's also cool as hell to existentially like really give yourself to something. And normal modern framing, if it's a confessional context, be it a theist or an atheist, is like you should only give your finitude to something that you are completely certain about. And so, like, Bill Nye the Science Guy arguing with the Ark Museum dude.
Ken Ham.
Yeah, that
Right.
the
Let's
most
get
viewed
ready to
science,
rumble.
the most viewed science and religion debate of all time, sadly,
Oh, man.
were two people that thought like the existential orientation is only justified by certainty.
Mm-hmm.
And philosophers of religion, I think just in general, not that all of us do, but like, are like, there's a completely different way of thinking about plausibility, and there's a different kind of beauty
Mm-hmm.
about the intensity of it. And
well, I think just to kind of close the circle on the conversation about how what kind of resources can we provide people to kind of navigate this current moment, both theologically, economically. I think in some respects, you know, right sizing the certainty for certain claims and just pointing out that there are pluralities of ways of looking at a variety of topics, and what are the ones that are actually going to be good news for the widest group of people. What are the resources that are going to help us, particularly if we're coming at it from a Christian perspective, to show love to God and neighbor, and can we have conversations that are respectful, informative, informed, in ways that are for the good of all, right? And that even just that posture, just to kind of recognize that there are a plurality of perspectives, that really, the central questions is, well, how is this going to help me make my way in a life and build a life that shows love for God and neighbor, that actually is informed by, not that we want to be consequentialists, but if there's no actual application or practical application, that needs to be part of the discussion too.
Hey folks, a quick word before we continue. Personalist Manifestos doesn't run paid advertisements. This show runs on the support of listeners like you. And honestly, we're not quite breaking even just yet. But we believe in what we're doing here, so we keep going. If this show has meant something to you, here's how you can help. Tell a friend about it, leave a review, or consider a small monthly contribution on Substack. I did the math. If everyone listening gave just $1 a month, that would cover our costs for the year. That's it. Less than a cup of coffee. Nobody here is in this for the money. We just want to keep the conversation going without losing money doing it. So if you want to help make that happen, head to Substack and look up Personalist Manifestos. All right, back to the show. I really enjoy listening to what you're saying, because I think about these sorts of questions a lot, speaking from the perspective of someone who doesn't teach philosophy of religion, but will like teach intro to Trinitarian theology or like intro to worldview for undergrads. And the discoveries there is like, even working within a like a confessional tradition, I think one of the secret or not so secret ingredients that I think is here but needs to just like be brought into light is, yes, both of you teach as informed subject matter experts who know their stuff and are asking critical questions such as the ones that you are, and just introducing students to material that matters and speaks to these existential longings, searchings, whatever. But here's the other thing: both of you genuinely care. And I think that's been the missing ingredient from like established institutions, including educational ones, and humanities departments. Like if you think back to the professors that you had that most spoke to what we're talking about, right? You're searching, you're feeling like, I feel like something's wrong. Am I the only one? Yes, they knew what books you should read to get you there, but they also took the time to just create that space to be like, you're not insane. Right? You're not alone. I see this too. And like, here's something that you might find interesting that will actually help you out in this angst or this searching. And this is where I feel like reading Willie Jennings on this has been, it's just like the scales fell from my eyes. He gets into it in like Christian Imagination at length. Um, but his little book, After Whiteness, A Theological Education and Belonging, it's kind of like, uh, just like a nice little like appendix to Christian imagination, be like, and here's how all of this affects Western theological education, which essentially, even though we're like post Christian, whatever, it's like, but the form of it is still, the scaffolding is very much shaped by this theological education model. He's like, isn't it interesting that all of that is based in colonial imaginary and a theology that baptized it? And yeah, sure, like, the history has changed and like we are where we are now, but a lot of those theologies are still here. A lot of those structures are still here. And he just
A
is
lot of
just,
them are making a comeback.
yeah. And he basically says, he's like, if you actually look at the architecture of the Western educational edifice, it is designed to train a self-sufficient white male who, lo and behold, looks a lot like a slave plantation owner.
Hmm.
And he's like, and because of that, the classroom, especially in theology and philosophy, is so often treated like a gladiator
Mhm.
coliseum of blood sport. And he's like, hey, everybody, we don't need to spill blood and guts on the floor for somebody to learn something about God. Or somebody, like, let's just do an end run around all of that. He said this in an interview, like, let's just do an end run around all that and be like, we are coming here with questions, fears, doubts, hopes, dreams. Some of us are very confident in what we believe and it's all settled. Some of us are performing that confidence, and some of us are like not even trying to hide the fact that we don't know why we're here, but it's the only place that would seem to entertain our questions for 5 seconds and not treat us like a pariah. And I'm like, if we have a hope for established theological education to continue, like, not only survive but thrive, it's reckoning with this edifice and actually being like, yes, the knowledge matters. Yes, knowing what to read, know how to read, all that sort of matters. But like, just creating a space where that seems to be like, well, I think I believe in God now. What do I do? The amount of trust that takes in a world where trust is very low with experts and institutions, like that takes a certain type of person or a certain type of person in a position of authority to to be available in that way, and doesn't take advantage of that trust, but cherishes it and like nourishes it for that other person's flourishing, not to create carbon copies of ourselves.
Hmm.
Let's just try doing that in a confessional context. It's like, yeah, no, you do not do that. But I'm like, just set the table for the 18, 19-year-olds to be like, okay, you told me all the right answers, but what is your daily experience? And once you start getting very different accounts of like all the right doctrinal statements, but their daily experience is so distant from that, you're like, well, let's have an honest conversation about this, and I'm not going to tell on you, and you're not going to go to hell over it.
But wait, is my daily experience going to be on the exam? Am I going to be tested on that?
I think parts of it should. like actually just being honest with ourselves, especially, with the sort of pure systematic theologians, that even that is contextually bound and philosophically saturated
Mhm.
with experiential
Oh, for sure.
perspectives and epistemology and whatever.
Hmm.
Like, let's just acknowledge that experience is informing everything, and it's just better to be self-aware
Mhm.
and self-critical and constructive about it as compared to try and hide the fact that, like, we all experience things and that shapes how we experience the world. And actually, God thinks our experience matters.
Mhm.
Like, not that it is like the sole authority on what is true or what is not, but it matters. It matters that you feel this, that you're asking this matters. Let's create space for that because God created space for that, right? I have a question that I wanted to ask before we wind down here is going back to the political theology stuff. You seem to be more of a fan of Niebuhr than Hauerwas.
Oh, that's not hard.
But I feel like a lot of the problems that you're surfacing and a lot of the constructive solutions you are gesturing towards sound to me more like Hauerwasian than they do Niebuhrian. And I just want to know your feelings on that.
Okay. One, I'm from North Carolina, and the most partisan divide in our state is around college basketball.
Okay.
And I hate Duke
Okay.
with like an unrivaled passion, except for maybe the Boston Celtics.
Kind of like Canucks fans cannot stand the Leafs.
Yeah. So, like, I just like the idea that I would generously read a Blue Devil.
Emphasis on devil.
And yeah, even though I am a Wake Forest Demon Deacon, but see, that is just an affirmation of our brokenness as Baptists, is that we're demon deacons, right? It's like a Baptist version of the Sinner Saint. So I assume that's part of it. Second, the Hauerwasian Mafia, Duke students from like that were my peers, like my age, the ones that graduated, were the most annoying clergy. They would go serve at some upper middle class Methodist church and think, because of the whole his expression of the post-liberal tradition, they would, they're like really insistent that God's literally Father, Son, and Spirit. That's like God's name. And that's part of the language game, all this kind of crap. And they're like, well, we're gonna not use any inclusive language. We're gonna remove the American flag from the sanctuary, and we're gonna serve the Eucharist every day. And now that's how we're sticking it to the system. And everyone in that church doesn't know what's going on. They don't know that they're being they just sound more conservative than the last minister who went to one of the other Methodist schools who said creator, redeemer, sustainer. And now they're like back to Father, Son, and Spirit. Thank you. That's more like got more dick energy in here. That's how, like I'm saying, it's how it comes across to a lot of the lay people. And when those people, my friends, like, I can introduce you to them at camp if you come again this year. Like I just remember, they'll be like, I love some Hauerwas and some William Kavanaugh. And they're like just sticking it to American imperialism with the Eucharist. And I'm like, half of your church are in the army. Do they know that's what they're doing? Yeah. Anyway, so there's that bit. So I find post-liberalism utterly problematic for metaphysical reasons. I find the thinking that the self-revelation of God is structured in Christian grammar to be the most giant dodge of like a real question. Like, is God the creator? And you're like, no, that's how grammar works. And you're like not going to say that there's a real God that does real things. And the only way you're allowed to get at it is through the inheritance of particular grammar. That's then normative, not based on the early church, but anyway,
so you think that they're not sticking it to the empire in ways that really matter.
Yeah.
Right. So there's
self-describing.
Right. It's a kind of performative,
the way it plays
resistance, but not an actual functional. Okay.
Yeah. Right. And second, and like I got back into, so I'm a liberal Protestant. So, like Niebuhr, we have a love-hate relationship with. And when Trump won again, I just started reading him again. and the like there are he he looked at the kind of naive liberalism of like pre-war social gospel as having failed to take seriously the brokenness of humanity.
Hmm.
And he took that very seriously and worked it through. I mean, there's like 5 Nebers through his life, and I don't like all of them equally. But like in Children of Light, Children of Darkness, he makes this point that the 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 Children of Darkness, at this point, he's talking about like Nazis or like warmongers, and in that context, it's like they're going to do their thing, and they'll invent the reality and force it on it, and like they're pretty sneaky about this. Like they have an orientation and they go after it, and they recognize that power is involved in winning. And they're going to create the conditions in which they win. And then the Children of Light, he's like, they wish if we explain this rationally and we tell the truth and try to be loving and stuff, like it obviously is going to win. And Niebuhr's like, this is the problem with them. They got great ideas and they forget humans are involved, and humans have a sin problem. And he's like trying to reintroduce to like the liberal theological tradition that he's like, you gotta be realistic here. Human beings, like, yeah, each one of us, we got our brokenness, but when we hang out together, we get worse. And if your anthropology is too high, you think, come, let us reason together. We're going to figure this out. You know what? Luckily, we have a Supreme Court. Well, it's going to make sure that when we declare war, like before billions of dollars get spent, obviously you would go to Congress because that's what's in the Constitution. And so we have that's going to be great. And we've got some nice agreements. Like if a Supreme Court justice opens up, the president nominates someone. And we do it every time and play by these rules. And, it's a little too close to the election. We'll wait till after the election. Then what happens? The other side, Children of Darkness, are just like, no, we want to be in charge. We're going to screw around with the rules. We'll obey them if we need to, use them against you, pretend like they matter. But we're going to end up taking over the Supreme Court. And then getting people in there that love the unitary executive theory, and then flood the court with problems on it. And we're going to operate in a system against its own integrity to seize power and do whatever we want. And we just need 30% of the country to do it. And in the meantime, we're going to convince them that the election was stolen and pardon the people that attacked the Capitol. And then we're going to look at the church and be like, don't you want pro-life justice? Yes, sir. Thank you very much. And then we're going to put a dude in charge. It's going to throw basically a John Hagee chart up when he's talking about what we're doing in the planet. And then like liberals are like, I just love the Constitution. And I think we really got to work on voter turnout. And Trump's like, I think we should get ICE agents at the polls. You just sit here looking at I'm thinking of just like how many nice mainline Protestant liberals are just like, I'm like, do you not know what we're dealing with? Like you gave earlier the example of like, Noah, he says, love your enemies. You have to know that you're going to have one. They're like looking at a tiger and the nice democratic farm and being like, don't we want to invite him over for dinner? And then the tiger does what a tiger does, eats the freaking sheep. And you're like, I just find that uncomfortable. Like, why would we do that? And so like Niebuhr is sitting there going, look, I understand you have a point. Like, we have this great invitation to this. Yeah, but you want to know why the gospel's good news? And that it's because it's for human beings and we freaking suck. Like, you can't trust us. And if you get us together, the incentive structure of what we used to call sin or law or death, all those kinds of things, they get amplified and it gets intense. And you need to be realistic here. And so like his point in a previous age where the kind of naivete about the power of facts, reason, and the inertia of the democratic project. It's like, well, yeah, you know what? It's really good if you're that naive, equipping the other side to leverage the whole thing against you, right? And one of the examples he's showing in Children of Light, Children of Darkness, he's like, Hitler won the election. He didn't break any laws. He just occupied the system, turned it against itself. And there was nothing about it that makes you go, that's what the intenders intended.
Mhm.
But he leveraged the system over against itself. So when I look at what's going on in America, you have a chunk of the church that have just they're like snorting 8 balls of MAGA. And then they're so blitzed on it that they're just like, yeah, it's just what Jesus wanted. But then the majority of them are like, we got to get along. I mean, like, we want to have your church unity, like, and show like that half my family are Islamophobic and warmongers, militant nationalists, and only respect democracy when they win. But I would hate to make them uncomfortable at the Eucharist. So that's what we're doing.
Adiafra, baby.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like that's the issue that's going on there. And if you think the solution to it is no, God's name is literally Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Like there's tons of problems with that, along with like what happens if there's intelligent life on another planet that doesn't have two genders required for reproduction, and maybe they don't have winged fowl. You know, like
Seahorse aliens.
yeah, like the Holy Spirit stuff. It's just one of those things that you're like, no, here's what the literal self-revelation is. It requires our biosphere and how things reproduce here. And I'm like, isn't that kind of weird? Right? You would say like God, the creator, is not like a tribal planet deity, but the whole freaking universe. That would be odd. Like anyway, so like there are just things about that form of theology I find problematic. But like if the solution to this moment is we're gonna serve the Eucharist every Sunday and we're gonna take the American flag out. I'm like, well, that's not helpful. I mean, sure, take the American flag out. In denominations that wish they were state churches, like whatever that is. But the like Niebuhr's point that I think is important is to recognize that the vision that embodied in Christ that he called the community into is one that was embodied in a world where you have to be honest about the dynamics of power, and that organizing in response to it means taking seriously the broken, perverted system that's present and naming it and responding to it on the conditions of the world as it is important. Like I don't, but also like there's a lot of things with Howard Ross that could turn into a whole long conversation.
It comes down to the response to the systems is what I'm really putting my finger on and saying that like your move towards peace, a certain type of peace, right? Because it's very possible, like with the Niebuhrian framework and Niebuhr himself, in that critical realism about the system, its brokenness, evil, right? The order of love versus the order of justice, right? Like the impossible possibility. Like, yes, the diagnostic power of what Niebuhr's doing, but then also his participation in that system, and to a certain extent, one could argue like being complicit in that system. So I think that's the sort of question I'm asking is, how do you be honest about that system and find a solution within it that doesn't just produce a version of the militancy or like shrug of the shoulders that is just the same problem in different packaging. Like, and I'm asking because the withdrawal, the renewed appreciation for the practices that form us into the type of people that can see realistically what's going to be like, well, if change requires me to be complicit, I write the Anabaptist move is like, I'm not going to be a part of it. I'm going to serve from here, right? And in that, not just be like, well, flags out, we're doing Eucharist every Sunday, job done. But like Kavanaugh talks about torture in Eucharist. Like in Chile during Pinochet's dictatorship, like there are people who are doing the kidnapping and torturing, like receiving Eucharist next to the people who are being disappeared and tortured. And the Eucharist is like the laser focused concentration point of it, but it's a microcosmic instantiation of the meso and macrocosmic problem.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm just like trying to sort through.
I mean,
There's
I'll
the
give you
diagnostic
I'll give you
stuff,
the
and
cliff
then
notes.
there's like
The
the solution
diagnostic
that
part.
gets us out of it.
Yeah, the diagnostic part's important. I think the habit of a lot of Peace Church people is to actually never do very good diagnostics because they prefer to perform purity and not have to understand the system, all the while paying taxes and being part of a structure that is going to do it anyway. Like there's literally very little difference between the impact my life has and my MAGA uncle, because the biggest things we do are going to be connected to an economic system we're tied to and a tax structure we both pay. So I may feel really good by being like, oh, torture in the Eucharist. Yeah, but really, we're the ones training the people to go steal people and disappear them and put a neocon adjacent warmonger in charge of the country. That's what we're paying for. And there's no difference between me and him, except I feel guilty about it. Like if I'm like all Peace Churching it. So like the diagnostic thing's really important. I'm not saying no one in the Peace Church does it well, but like the tendency of dookies, yeah. Okay. Then the second part is like like the response rate, like later Niebuhr, I think performs like a kind of how not to do certain things. Like when you're looking at what you do in response to it, one place I like to think through is mostly because I just spend a long time writing about it, is for Bonhoeffer, his response is like, first, well, the church has a witness to the state role, right? And so, what happens? Now the state's failed. Now you get the discipleship life together period. We need to have a church that actually creates disciples over against what's going on in the state. The church fails. Then what do you do as an individual vocationally when there's not a community of the church or of a larger community of the state that's responsive to the orders of creation like that you're supposed to be doing? And what's the community finds or is the conspiracy? And he's like, I'm choosing guilt, because all the options are guilty, right? Like it's not like he changes. He thinks like, oh no, Jesus would be cool with assassination. He uses the whole concept of that, like it is self-chosen guilt. Like what's the least worst bad option? So like, I think once you've done the diagnostics, if you're an American, it's probably still true for y'all. Y'all just don't even get to vote on the stupid stuff y'all getting brought in on. Well, we have variations. We have variations of Caesar and America, and those of our friends that cooperate with telling the story that the prime minister slipped out is a fake story. Is that we've learned that it was awkward to have plantations, then it was awkward to have child labor laws. And we kept having these movements of justice. And then we figured out we can export all the violence of our economic system through NAFTA and trade agreements. So other people have the equivalent of slave relationships to the earth. We can exploit natural environments where other people live, not in my backyard. And then we can have a revolutionary Eucharist, pay taxes to the world's greatest military, get all of y'all other nations to like the benefits you get of us having a big military, so y'all can have universal health care, and then we all work it out. I mean, like you get in that situation, and I think there's like what's the difference between me and my MAGA family members? Like, I don't make racist jokes, and I went to a protest. Like, that's about it. Like they're wonderfully nice to their neighbors. I am to mine. Like, what's the difference? Like, are we going to like all of a sudden feel like we're not as complicit in it because my minister like loves William Kavanaugh and Hauerwas? Like, and then we're so pure, we are not going to be invested in our institutions and things that actually leverage power. Because isn't the world better off if America only put, I don't know, 20 million people on crosses instead of 60? Like, does that matter? Or are we just, it's bankrupt, so like bump it. I'm going to sleep better if I'm not having to figure out how to get someone that raises class before identity questions in democratic politics first. I think it would be great if we were like, look, can we just like do identity politics after we force the rednecks that are racist to have healthcare and jobs that matter? Like, I promise you, science is on our side, that someone that knows they can provide for their family, have dignity of work and something to do in the world will just not be as bigoted. They'll like the economic conditions, like ones that are surprisingly coherent with how God organizes capital and labor when God wrote the Torah. Like, if we used our influence to mean that you couldn't win one of the two parties' nominating processes unless you signal deep solidarity to working class that are overwhelmingly white in America, but that working class consciousness would benefit all the minority populations. If you just framed it that way, you might change child poverty. And guess what happens when your children aren't impoverished? You don't see someone's name is Jose as a threat to everything that's important. Why? Because your kids go to school together, they know they're going to eat, and they have a good education and healthcare. Then all of a sudden you meet each other at a T-ball field rather than a line to get food. You just have a different, and what do you think that like Niebuhr's sitting there going, like, maybe if we wanted to love our neighbors, we would create material conditions where the otherness of the neighbor is not a threat to the livelihood of your child. That's like the structural insight. Now, I think in America, like when you think of like the three stages for Bonhoeffer of like the failure of the state, the failure of the church, then the movement into the conspiracy, I think that we don't know, like there's a actual part of the church that has known this was BS the whole time. It's called the Black Church in America.
I was gonna go there. I was like, secret option C.
Yes.
Liberation tradition.
Yes.
But even it's like, because you're sorry to jump in, but that's where I was gonna go, right? And there's, I can't remember his name, but he talked, you had him on Homebrewed and you were talking, he's like, there's this divide between liberalism and fundamentalism. He's like, and then there's the dark horse of liberation.
Yeah.
But even within that, it's like, okay, like, because some people said Bonhoeffer doesn't go far enough.
Mhm.
Like, well, we need Cone. And then Dolores William comes in and be like, well, here's Cone's blind spots.
Yeah.
Right. But it's like, that I think is like, we actually need the liberation from this two-party system that we've been locked in to for so long that we can't even see a third or fourth possible option.
Yeah. But see, here's the element that I find most important for predominantly white churches in the West to learn from the Black church is they never expected dominant culture to perform the narrative so that they are no longer obligated to enact it and pass it down in their congregation.
Would you just stop expecting that?
Yeah, but mainline Protestantism, this was like the problem of, Niebuhr had it in a different way, right? The church was still culture dominant. He's on fucking
It's all right.
It's your podcast. You can edit if you want. He's on Time Magazine, right? So, but
And
like,
Palamas.
yeah, but
Yeah.
we're not in that situation anymore.
Yeah.
And so the part of where the failure of discipleship happens in predominantly white churches in the West is they don't know how to tell the story and orient people towards the collective vision they have, because it was always told when they were culture dominant.
Yeah.
And there is a part of the church that learned the faith by stealing the religion from the slave masters. It's not like African traditional religion was running around with a crucified Hebrew Lord. They get alienated from all these different cultures, thrown in this horrible context, and then are like, why would they tell this story? And so I
You
think
really shouldn't give us the book that is actually helping us see that the protagonist is not the people that are colonizing us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was Cohn's criticism of Niebuhr, is around like he would he thought the race issue should have been adiaphora until you get to this one point.
That's
That
what I'm
was
saying. And this, but then also too, this is the value of like the Black womanist tradition,
Mhm.
where Dolores Williams comes in and she's like, yes, but also can we just not just hear from men
yeah.
too, right? But it's like the the good this I mean this will I think we can land the plane is the good news of the kingdom is what is counted as the very marginal is actually revealed to be the center and boundary of it all. And
Yeah.
and
Or like the one thing I've learned beyond the day of his life is the view from below.
yeah.
Mhm.
Like to understand the world, you have to view from the ones who are excluded, harmed, killed, abused. Like, and he's like that and the arcane disciplines,
Yeah.
you
And
know, the
that's
Eucharist and baptism. He's like, after that, we probably got to sell our
Right.
property, probably need bivocational ministers because the moment there's something to protect, they
Mhm.
ignore Jesus,
Hmm.
you know. But I do think like what the mainline Protestants or just white Christians in the West have really important things to learn from our Jewish kin about what it's like to have family as the site of religious identity and formation as a diaspora people all the time, and the Black church as to what does it look like to have a deep vision of justice grounded in your faith and know how to cooperate with people that don't share it, be it in organizing or within the political system and this kind of thing. We just lost Jesse Jackson, and without Jesse Jackson, you'd never have Barack Obama. But but what did Jesse Jackson do because he was from the Black church? He didn't get up there and go, "Oh, I'm going to form the Black Power movement of the Democratic Party." He formed the Rainbow Coalition. And like when I interviewed him on the podcast and we were talking about it, you know, he said that the Black church learned that the gospel begins in America when you look at the congregation and tell them that you are somebody. And I'm not speaking, I'm quoting God, right? And that affirmation
Hmm.
of that each individual's the site of value and that our collective vocation is the recognition of it in each other. He's like, that is the promise of democracy. And so I pushed back against, he was young leader there when King's assassinated, against the like turn to stay internal to go like, no, we're the Rainbow Coalition. Because the promise of democracy that we fought for is something that is potentially included for all the different peoples that have become to be a part of the country. And he said, and we should be good at doing it because that was what the church was always about. Unless you cut Acts out of the Bible, that was his. Like unless you're cutting Acts out of the Bible, this is the most church thing to do, right? And so the Black church in America, which has plenty of reasons not to, has learned to tell the story of America and the story of the church, where its vocation is being the permanently present nag to a system that would hate to abandon both the gospel and the promise of democracy. And I think that that is a different consciousness that you could honestly, like you could take most of Hauerwas and figure out a way for white churches to do it that way. It just wouldn't be that much fun. But I do think that it's that shift of culture dominance, and we're at a point where the conditions of late modernity are letting an increasing number of people that thought the system was for them know it's not. Like there's increasing alienation of both the individual, of the collective, of the economic and the material. And when it goes to the left, one of the other places that the more progressive side of any place has is they see the future and they're running towards apocalypse. So you don't know how to talk about the future with hope. And when we look to the past, all we have is a genealogy of isms. Like if you notice last time at the nominating committee, the individual who told the story of America that was most proud of America was William Barber. Why is a guy in charge of the Moral Monday movement, who's a prophetic Black preacher, saying more cool things that he likes about America than all the Democrats that are up there without religion? Because the only history they can be grounded in is all the problems of the past and the apocalypse we're running towards to the future because capitalism and the environment and military industrial complex. But then what's William Barber talking about? Uh, oh, let me tell you about, tell the story of Booker T. Washington and then Jobadiah Jones. And he starts naming the, the, the story that was there, the legacy of King that comes in, blah, blah, blah. Like, and then when he looks to the future, he starts calling out organizers at these communities of Moral Monday. Like you see, like the, the, the moment that a part of what I think the Trevor Noah bit was getting at, or like that problem with progressives and the need for meaning and stuff, is the inability to talk about we aren't discerning how we inherit the past. We're cutting it off because all it is isms. We can't go to the future because all it is like questions that now we have to spend half a semester on natalism. But like that is alienation writ large. And if that's the narrative you're selling people to organize against Christian nationalism or capitalist gung-ho, you're going to lose. You're like, look, do you want to kill the planet, kill the poor? Do you want to, let's begin by acknowledging that almost everything that matters to you is tied to some intrinsic evil. Now, we're going to give you a chance to feel even more guilty about your subjectivity. And you talk too loud. That was a microaggression. Like that kind of stuff happens. No one cares. Like, who wants to sign up for that? Like, it's not compelling. Like, here's a cool way of being honest and discerning the past. It's called a prayer of confession. Yeah, but you know what the prayer of confession's about? It's about the like actual discernment that has to happen in your life. There's you're discerning what you're inherited. And there are things that the discernment involves repentance. And then there's elements that are like beautiful gifts. And sometimes I'm fascinated, like, why the people that love the science and like to demonize the other part of the country that don't trust science also don't get like, they imagine humans exist in a vacuum. I'm like, what do you think that if you were born 100 years ago, like you would put your pronouns in a bio? Like, no, you wouldn't. Now, if you were born further back, I probably would have owned slaves because all my family did. Like, that's just humans. Like, we have made actual progress by discerning generation to generation what you hand on and what you keep. Right. And when I think of, here's Elgin and I were downtown Raleigh. Like, I used to walk it all, but downtown has a monument for all the wars. My family are half pacifist, half military. My grandfather was the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. So the highest enlisted one, in Washington at the end of Vietnam anyway, so that, and then my dad's like, bumper stickers, when Jesus said, love your enemy, I'm pretty sure it didn't mean bomb them. That, like, if that's my family. So, but when I would go visit my grandfather growing up, we'd walk it and he would tell the story of every Fuller that was in all wars because there's a monument for all of them. So when I go back here with Elgin and we're in North Carolina, I'm like telling him the stories. And we have this nice experience. Then the next time we're in downtown, because it's right next to First Baptist where his sister was in preschool, we're picking her up from preschool. He's like third grade at this point. There's a field trip going on, walking in front of the Civil War monument that wasn't built until more recently by certain organizations that, would like to. And it's twice the size of all the other monuments. And it has 4 cannons pointing out on it and this giant thing. And at the top of it, before you get to the sergeant that was resisting the Yankees when they took Raleigh, Sherman comes in, it says, for our Confederate dead. And when we got there, I talked about Hiram Shaw Fuller, like my great-great-grandfather or whatever. So we had that experience. There is a class that was visiting the museums, and so you're walking by, and Elgin just starts crying in the car. I'm like, what's wrong? He said, did you see that? What? And I'm like, oh, it's probably like a field trip. He goes, yeah, but half the kids in the field trip are black, and they're like getting a lecture about this monument that says for our Confederate dead. Are they the our? Now, it wasn't that I didn't know that monument got put in later by the slightly updated and rebranded Ku Klux Klan that funded it. It's just the only time I visited that part of history was with my grandfather talking about Hiram Shaw Fuller, who went through all the things. And then we get to Vietnam and he would talk about his friends there, right? Like that. But then my son noticed something, that he had internalized the very faith I was trying to hand on to him. And then he raised something about how I related to the past. And then I get to decide, like, do I want to recognize, repent, and discern the way it shows up? And I also am recognizing that I had handed something to him that was more beautiful than what I received, because all those stories were told through the Southern grievance narrative of our connection to the military in America. And they're all working class, and their option out of rural working class was the military for my family historically. That's what the context for all of it. So to me, that was what it was. And then he points out the rather obvious thing. And then you would think someone who like teaches a class called James Cone and the Black prophetic tradition would have thought of, but I didn't. Because there's like that, the all of your ancestors live in you bit, like all the Jedi live in you, Ray. But then they're also like, they all live in you, but like what version of it's getting expressed? Right. And so to me, that's a real discerning thing that happens. Does it mean we should be honest about all the ugliness? We should also be like, until we started conserving certain things, humans spent 100,000 years not knowing how to relate to anyone they weren't related to. Like, and then we had symbolic rituals, and then we had ways of building social bonds and trust that didn't require DNA. And then you have this big story. And at some point, we had an experiment that has horribly ugly things in it about the conquering of land, and we called it New World, even though it wasn't new. It included chattel slavery and all this. And there was an experiment that had a promissory note in it that we've continued to wrestle with, and eventually everyone even got to vote. And why was it that when the progressives got together, it was the famous Black preacher who told them this story isn't finished, and reminded them that King said, well, you wrote a check, but it was returned insufficient funds. And then you get a bunch of white progressives that are like, well, that's because the whole thing is inherently corrupt, and I have no past I can inherit, and we're going to kill the planet, and I don't know if I should have kids. No wonder the story sucks. And that's why I think, like Trevor Noah's point, is getting at something real. Like, you can say yes to discerning the past, and know that the next generation might discern your life and go, but Dad, it literally says for our Confederate dead, and there's cannons pointing at Black 5-year-olds walking in front of a monument. And I have to repent. And if we're lucky, my grandkid will call me and my son out and be like, what if they're like, what? Okay, nice. You had your own chickens and you hunted, but then when you were out, you didn't care if it was factory farm meat. And that's like utterly vile. Like, Granddad, what is your problem? And I'm like, hamburgers. Like, I think they're self-justifying. Like, you see what I mean?
That's the ethic, man. It's
sorry for getting triggered and extending your last question. But I do think that's really important.
No, I think so. If we need to split this into two parts, we will. But no, I mean, I think that to me is a doable thing, and it's totally consistent with what Israel is told from the get-go. Like, teach your kids the ways, and if your preceding generations are done messing up, there's still an option for you to turn before it gets even worse. Right? I mean, like, and as a part of that, knowing the good and the bad of your history, and never forgetting the miraculous acts of God that liberated from you. And Israel's like, we won't forget. God's like, don't remember. They're like, trust me, God, and we won't forget. Minute that disasters like strike, it's like, we forgot, and we're now worshiping the false gods and getting into the but like, yeah, that requires knowing your own story, the good and the bad of it, and allowing the younger generations to like actually listen And when they call you out on it, hearing it. I mean, I'll never forget. I actually wrote about this in a piece on anti-fascism. About the only time my Nona ever talked about what it was like being in Southeast Italy during the war and like fascist Italy. And she said it was a sad day when Mussolini died. And I was like, what? Like, my brother was reading this History of Europe book, and like Dark Conde was talking about like, the narrative is like, well, are either of you Peaky Blinders fans?
Adjacent.
Okay, they've it's historical fiction, but they dig into the
Mhm.
reality as like, the Allies are like, oh, we were the anti-fascists. When they're like, the possibility of fascism in Britain and other
Mhm.
places, like, it was a close call. But so my brother's reading a book on this, and I was like, it was a sad day when Mussolini died, and like, say more. But basically, she was like, as much as he was an evil man, seeing photos of him hanging basically naked and beat up from the rafters with his mistress and other people in the army, it was an expression of empathy and her like way of processing. I think like violence doesn't solve things; it only makes it worse. And like being able to look at a person who's created so much suffering, trauma, and devastation, death, and still feel sad when you see them humiliated and beaten up.
Mhm.
And that's when like my pure middle class North American moral certainty and like naivete was just totally complicated, because I was like,
He's a
bad,
baddie.
yeah, bad guys are bad guys,
Mhm.
and bad guys get killed by good guys, and good guys win. That was the morality. But then now it's like what you're saying is like, it's always more complicated than that. And knowing just how complicated it is and undoing the stuff that needs to be undone so that we leave it a little bit better for our young ones, that hopefully we do have enough hope to bring into the world. Because
Mhm.
I'm saying, I know people are like, why would I bring a young person into the world? I'm like, the minute we get to that point, it shows just how hopeless we feel. But like, the possibility of bringing life into this world and teaching them to do better than mom and dad did, it's like maybe our one chance. I don't know.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time. I am super excited for your big Bonhoeffer book.
Big, beautiful Bonhoeffer.
Big, beautiful Bond.
And thank you, Myron, for making
Yeah,
this happen. And for
absolutely.
what like that, what you're doing with this institute is so needed right now.
Hmm.
Thank you.